Welcome, everybody. We're going to give people here a minute to get into the webinar. But today we'll be talking about Log4j and the Log4Shell vulnerability and what we've learned. So give people just a minute here, because I know it does take a minute for people to get signed in. Appreciate you joining us here. While we're waiting for people to join, I'll also remind people that you can take advantage of the chat. We do have people that are monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A. So please, give us your feedback. Let us know that you're there and ask any questions you may have during the presentation. So it looks like we've got a fair number of people in here. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Eric Wing. I'm one of the technical leaders here at Trend Micro. And I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. We're going to be talking about Log4j and what we've learned. And we have a group of experts here to talk to you. We've got Jay Yaneza, who's our director of our managed XDR operations. We got Suraj Sahu, who's the manager of our threat research. And we got Chris LaFleur, who is the manager of our incident response. The format we're going to have today is each of them are going to share their experience with you and educate you on the Log4Shell, Log4j vulnerability. And then at the end, we're going to have kind of a panel discussion where we can address any questions or things you may have. And we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Suraj.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for welcome notes. And hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2022. Again, still we are discussing Log4j. That was last year, I think. No, that was not actually last year. That was in December last year. So hope you all can see my screen. And it's look good for you all. Let me know if you're seeing not in presentation mode.
You're not in presentation mode there, Suraj.
Okay, good. Thanks for reminding. Now should be in presentation mode.
You're good now.
Okay. So Log4Shell, what we know now. So I think in December we all were gearing up for holidays and celebrate Christmas and New Year, but that time this vulnerability called Log4Shell was disclosed. I think it's one of the vulnerability we can say being disclosed in a decade, which impacting I think most of the web applications we know out there that's using the Java, right? So within a 20 days of time frame, I think less than 20 days, it's just not a vulnerability being disclosed. There was like several other vulnerability being disclosed in Log4Shell. That's we count it as 4 now, right now, but we don't know what happens next, right? So let's deeply look into this, what all 4 are and how much those are critical, which one we should be focusing on and which one not, as mitigation purpose. So this is what timeline looks like, right? All 4. But what was Log4j before this 2021 44228 December 9th? There were only 2 vulnerabilities being disclosed before this in Log4j. Those were like one in 2020 and another one was in 2017, I think, yes. And all those information is available in this Apache login website. So what happened on December 9th, which triggered all these new 4 vulnerabilities? I think other 2 which were disclosed before were not that easy to crack by the researcher out there, and was not that critical enough also to leverage. But when 44228 was disclosed, the researcher out there start digging into it because it was so clear what is wrong there. So some of the good researchers start digging to know how we can prevent and mitigate. But other researchers were also out there who weaponize these vulnerability and created some of exploits to harm some of the servers there for the wrong intents and wrong purpose. So let's just I know everyone might be knowing Log4j. So from the name, it's kind of very clear. Log for Java. Log4j means log for Java. Means all those Java applications we build using that, we can use this utility to build for logging capability in our product. And we can be easily configured through the configuration file of Log4j. There's other for utility, like for not .NET, C, C++. So that's called Log4C, Log4Net. All those are there, but those were not vulnerable. Only Log4j for Java application is vulnerable. So in if you go and deeper on 44228, that is very simple. That it's a vulnerability on a lookup feature which provided by Log4j. What lookup feature help us? Lookup feature help us here to create a config file based on the information we can pull in the runtime, and then create our config file based on that, and different places in our configuration file. There's a different kind of lookup features available in Log4j, like one is Java lookup, date lookup, context lookup, and JNDI lookup. So this JNDI, which I'm talking about now, is going to explain like Java name and direct domain initiative. In this JNDI, what happened actually, that you can actually create a request such a way that you don't only able to look only inside LDAP server or other servers, but you can also look up outside LDAP server also, which can be controlled by attacker, and attacker can be hosting some malicious file there, like malicious content. And with that feature, attacker started weaponizing this and sending the request to the vulnerable servers out there, and then able to download the file and able to execute on the victim servers, which get compromised. So that's why the CVS score there is a 10.0, and that's why we call it RC, remote code execution. So the next vulnerability we see is 2021-45046 that was disclosed on 14th of December. This is very similar as the previous one, but the difference here is it's because initially the developer missed to patch it completely. But here the vulnerability is not in a typical JNDI lookup, but it's in the context lookup. The way context lookup is being used in an application, and not as default configuration, but if you change the default configuration in your configuration file, and can be used to change that context lookup to do that JNDI LDAP lookup, and then cause the same kind of a effect as 44228. So this is why also it's code 9.0. But why it's 9.0? Because it's non-default configuration file. If you have not configured the file properly, it's because of if you have changed that configuration the way it's come as a default. So that's why severity is low. It's not 10.0, it's 9.0. On 18th December, another vulnerability being mentioned, that is 2021-45105. If you see here, the CVS score says 6.6, and the typicality is DOS. The reason here is that it's again is not easy to attack and exploit this one vulnerability. Because of that, again, it's on a context lookup, but on not on a default configuration file. If someone has modified a configuration file and using it, then they are vulnerable for it. So not most of developer change that configuration file. So that's why the severity here is low and moderate. On December 28th, there's another vulnerability being disclosed that called 2021-44832. So this one is again a moderate one, not very critical, because here to attack or exploit this vulnerability, you need a certain of assets. So you can go and modify those configuration file first, and then you can go carry on attack. So if you see all those 4 vulnerabilities, the first one, which is on my leftmost screen, was where there's no default, was in a very default configuration attacker can exploit, and there's no other information required. So that's why it was very critical, and we should always focus on this one. Others are moderate and not very critical. I would say critical enough to exploit, and that's you can see it here also. This is the CVS 3.0 matrix for all of these 4 in order. So if you see the one which I highlighted in a red, that attack complexity, for 44228, the attack complexity is low. It means it's easy to exploit, it is easy to create exploit for that, and easy to do the damage. But for others, the attack complexity is high. It means it's not easy to create exploit for that, or you can exploit it. create an exploit code for that. So with that, let's see some metrics for 44228, what it actually have as an stats. So this is a vulnerability tester for 2021 44228, and the data here is like 320K unique tests being carried out. Out of that, 1,000 plus results tested positive that those websites are vulnerable for 2021 44228. Again, if we look at the perspective in the of how exploit stats look like the how much exploits code is being created in the public. If you see, there's a 50 plus unique exploit is being created for 44228. For the others, it's just a test POC or not really exploit code, and that can be confirmed with the like different sources you can find like in a GitHub and package from those exploit stats for 44228. But for like the last one 4482, if you see, there's only 3, and those are like just test POC, not really epitomized one. So this stat shows like 44228 is being being discussed more in a attacker community, and they're developing more and more exploit code that, and we have also observed that it's being used to do some of kind of like a coin miner and ransomware from 44228, not for others. And this is a trend of how exploit attempt is being observed in our customer base. So if you see this is still growing, it's not going down. So if you see, this is more than 300K we have observed just last week and this week. So the attack exploit is still happening for 44228. So this is the one most critical vulnerability out there out of 4, which we should be focusing on and try to mitigate it. Now I will hand over to Chris, and he will share how exploit code is damaging and how exploit code is doing in a victim system. Over to you, Chris.
Okay. Can you go ahead and stop the share? There we go. And should be able to see. There you go. Can you see my screen fine?
Yes, can see it, Chris.
All right. So Log4Shell. So I want to open this up to a polling question real quick for everybody that's listening and watching. Can we throw that poll up real quick? Thank you. Where to find the attacks with Log4j activity, right? Where would they typically show up? We'll go ahead and give it a few seconds here. And yeah, I think we're good. Let's see what the results are. Nice. All right. So someone has been watching our webinars lately. Network sensors and server workloads. Nice. Yeah. So basically, that's spot on versus endpoint data and email, because obviously this isn't an email compromise or vulnerability. So it coming through an email sensor won't matter. Endpoint wise, you might be able to catch something if it was used as a lateral movement, which we'll get into here in a minute. But really, the meat and potatoes of it is in the network sensor and the server cloud portion, right? And then I'm going to ask another poll question real quick. Let's go ahead and pop that one up. When you see an attempt of Log4j and your product stopped it, is that the end of the attack? I'll give you like a couple seconds on that one. Pretty quick. All right. Let's go ahead and close it. Let's see what the results are. Never. I'm always under attack. I love it. Yeah, depends on the source, and the SOC team definitely needs to confirm, right? That's extremely important. That's what this is kind of highlighting here, is that just because your sensor went off, if you're not looking at your console, for example, and you don't have a SOC team looking into your alerts themselves and validating them, you don't necessarily know whether or not the attack was just a scanning operation or just someone actually breaching and successfully taking action, right? That's basically what I wanted to highlight there. So let's go over here. So I want to show you all this. This is a DMZ server and a file server from a DDI's perspective, our deep discovery device. That's our IDS system. Essentially, we can see that we have some Russian domains, of course, .ru, and some IPs mixed into here, basically continuously attacking and trying to exploit these servers that are hanging out in the DMZ zone. This is an actual attack that was attempting to take place that our Vision 1 console was able to pick up and put together for us. It's quite interesting. Like I said, it's a file server and a third-party application appliance that are sitting on the WAN connection, and the connections are passing right through the firewalls that they were supposed to be behind, and was able to attempt to exploit these servers. So yeah, just as a good example of what that might look like from a scanning activity and attempt. So why is XDR better? So that's the real piece here for the Log4j piece. The thing that we've been seeing in the field is that the initial breach itself hasn't been coming from Log4j per se. It's actually been coming from another exploitable service or internal process, either email, phishing email that got in with some quack bot or some other downloader tool and credential stealer that essentially allowed the threat actor to get a foothold inside the network. What we have noticed is that they've been doing network discovery scans on endpoints and any server that they're able to get their hands on to find appliances and third-party devices that are in your network that are susceptible to the Log4j shell to use it as a lateral attack. For example, here I have this one as a lateral movement from vCenter. This is very unique inside of certain ransomware gangs, specifically Conti and Lockbit, where they will try to get into your ESXi host, right? And the reason why they want to get into the ESXi host is because if they can encrypt the VMDK files versus the actual or the VMX files, they can basically destroy your entire network for you from the ESXi host versus trying to do it through a GPO policy or some other means. So we've actually been seeing vCenters being abused in the sense of the Log4j vulnerability. So an attacker will come in, like for an example, through an Exchange server that wasn't patched up or had some vulnerability on it. Instead of them moving directly to the domain controller, like we have been seeing them over the last year in 2021, they've done network asset discovery, and they would find a vCenter server. They would steal and enable SSH credentials into the ESXi clusters, and essentially on the impact, they'll deploy ransomware payload through a GPO plus through the SSH service on the ESXi host to initiate that ransomware and encryption event. That way you have two types of ransomware essentially running in your environment. You have one that's built for your Windows application, obviously, and then you have another one designed specifically to run inside of a Linux kernel, which is what ESXi is running on. So why is XDR better? Well, the purpose is that way this initial breach to this network discovery piece is where the DDI and a tipping point box would come in handy, right? So your initial breaching for an exposed service, a tipping point box would assist you on that that 0-day patching, virtual patching solution, right? The DDI part, like what we saw over here, this DDI is good for finding those lateral movements, right? So I can see that endpoint A is starting to scan every device in my network, and now I have a source of a possible breach location where someone is doing something that they're not supposed to be, or something that's just out of the normal, right? The other cool thing too is that on the lateral movement parts, if they try to pass a payload through, our DDI can pick it up and actually sandbox it for you That way you can actually get an on-demand package of protection pass through the rest of your devices as well. The SSH piece specifically, so if you're not using SSH, if you're not using SSH, that would be another new service that shows up all of a sudden. DDI would flag on and alert you through your Vision One console. All right, and here's an email snippet that we actually got from an attempt of an affiliate where we were working this breach, and after our initial response, the good news is they didn't get to ransomware, if you can read it. The Trend Micro team did a really good job of stepping in ahead of time and stopping the attack. Obviously, our threat actor here was not very happy with it, but he was nice enough to actually confirm our findings for us, where he was stating that he did use proxy shell as the breach point, and then proceeded to use Log4J on the vCenter environment, which is it helps us because it helps us make sure that our evidence is pointing in the right direction. We're chasing the right tails. Unfortunately, he was able to get away with some data exfiltration pieces. And note, I wish I had a DDI in this environment because I would love to see the transactions that took place between the Exchange server and the vCenter locations. That way we could see the full attack unfold. Unfortunately, at this time, they only had one solution in their environment, and they didn't even have EDR at the time. And that's all I got. Jay Yaneza?
Thank you, Chris. Gonna go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, I believe it's up and running. Here's another example. So Chris went through some of these attacks, and from the Managed XDR perspective, we've actually still witnessed this Log4j, Log4Shell exploit attempts. And as Suraj actually indicated, it's still very common for us to see. And I believe this is also across all vendors. We're still seeing this active exploitation, a month into the initial public disclosure of it. What we have here actually is an example of what happens if they actually got in. And this is from an EDR perspective. So it's a big picture, but let me kind of break it down for you a bit. So over here, you could see that this is actually a lot of things that's being done by a threat actor once they're able to compromise the environment. So indeed, this is actually a system that's actually running VMware Horizon View. It's a 64-bit system running Java, yes, and the build is actually 7.13.1. The build is, according to the information that we have, this version should have been released around Q1 of 2021, right? And it's still been running on the environment. So very, as you can see here, it's everything actually happened so fast in this incident. There were items wherein the PowerShell was actually executed immediately. These two dots over here happened within 5 minutes of each other. Immediate utilization of what's there within the environment, using NL test and this VBS script to gather information. And then we also see that they introduced additional files, the rclone tool for data exfiltration, and then a method of DLL side loading on the side. So all of these things actually happened very, very fast. And it was quite fortunate for us that we were able to catch it. Now, what's interesting here is that this version, if you look into here, there were already controls provided by VMware, compensating controls around the time of the public disclosure of the vulnerability. Yes, the mitigating controls are actually further down, a few days after, a few weeks after. However, still, what caught us that during the incident, we were having this discussion with the customer. They were actually kind of 50-50 into making sure that they actually have a good inventory of their software. Okay. And during this time that the Log4j, Log4Shell phenomenon was actually ongoing, we had multiple conversations with customers who were wanting to get a full view of their environment, either through vulnerability scans or looking at file properties, depending what they really had. And we were able to see that, for most part, because Log4j is actually a common component, a lot of these vendors actually were able to provide advisories within a few days, 2 to 3 days, or well within a week, or not more than 2 weeks. It's very interesting to see that these controls, even though they were actually published by the vendor who's using this component, still hasn't really gone into production, and it's still left out there and exposed. So this brings me to one of the key points here. So one of the guidance that I'm really a fan of is the CIS critical security controls. It used to be 20 key controls. Now they've rolled it down to 18 in the latest version. And the 3 key things that is really, really important for us to understand in this whole Log4j, Log4Shell phenomenon is that the key controls that actually speak of ensuring that you have an inventory of your software assets and making sure that continuous vulnerability management is happening is actually in those top controls, right? There's another portion here that I actually have colored in blue. I hope you could see this blue color about secure configuration, because we've also encountered some environments wherein they actually have publicly exposed some of these services, and unfortunately they got fairly compromised during this time, right? And so, if it shouldn't be publicly exposed, then it shouldn't, right? It should be really secured, well behind the DMZ and stuff. But still, it doesn't take away from the fact that if you're running software, Log4j is actually a perfect example of what happens if the shared component is vulnerable, because essentially when you install the software, you actually don't know what's there. And it's very important to take stock on what components there is within that software, then actually check the vendor if they actually have if they're actually affected, or what is their advice on that software. So I did have an example for VMware View. However, that's not the only application that's actually utilizing this software, right? And again, taking stock of your software and making sure that these components are updated is actually a very difficult task. And we've seen a lot of our customer base trying to cope with these compensating or mitigating controls, either patching the software or making sure that, if the vendor says that it's safe to delete, or we've seen some advisors with that, it's safe to delete this file, just delete the file. And these controls can actually be performed. And then if it shouldn't be publicly exposed, make it difficult for the threat actors to get into that asset in the first place. I'm going to close out with this slide. Patch all the things, right? The vulnerability for Log4j is something that we've seen, last year. However, it's not new, right? Software components have been compromised reoccurringly over the past few years. And in fact, the compromise to servers, publicly exposing servers, has been one of those things that has been really, really evident in the year of 2021. We think it's going to continue towards this year, 2022. And so patching actually just gives you that feeling that you've done your best to provide controls over this potential exploits, to control the threats, and to curb your vulnerabilities. That doesn't go to say that you shouldn't watch your environment, though, because you should. You still should. And so watching your environment like a hawk, as you have been already, that still goes hand in hand. But the thing is, if you patch, then you have really less to worry about, right? If you patched your Windows operating system, you should also patch this application that's running on that operating system, because it could still be a attack surface. So I'm going to end there. Eric, back to you.
Thanks, Jay. With that, we're going to open it up to the panel discussion. So I'll hand it over to Mila here, who will lead that as our moderator. So just as a reminder, if you have any questions or have any, whether it be on the material we talked about or something related to Log4j, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and we got people monitoring it, and we'd love to hear from you. So over to you, Mila.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. As our panelists have mentioned earlier, this is our first webinar. And we did actually a couple of weeks ago, we thought we will be the last topic of the year was actually Log4j. I never imagined that we have to start the year with the same topic. But anyway, I think there's just a broader conversation in Log4j or Log4Shell that we wanted to talk about. That's why we wanted this to be a conversation of what have we learned about this exercise? But more importantly, we need to recognize that a lot of us, a lot of the organizations are still patching, are still managing some of these items. So I think there's still a lot of conversations we have to do about some tips, some best practices. Okay, so let's kind of kick it off. I will definitely invite Chris and Suraj to turn on their camera if they're not camera shy at all. Thank you. Thanks again for joining us. We've had Chris in the last one. Jay have joined us in our first series, especially on XDR, and our first timer Suraj is here. So thank you. How are you guys? Was it a good start of the year?
Busy, but busy is good.
That's right. It's highly predictable. Let me start with, we have a lot of questions, by the way. Thank you. So let me start with kicking off probably this portion. I know we were surprised by this year-ender security issue, but I'd like to take your stance or your opinion in terms of looking at it in both ways. You guys helping our customers, but also us also. Some of our products and solutions have to be vetted as well. What do you think? What are your observations in terms of the industry response on this year-ender security issue? I just want to get your take on it on a more holistic view. Anyone can comment.
Well, I was going to say, Jay actually touched on something right at the end of his slide that we see as always been a common problem, and it's an important one to highlight and to stay on top of outside of just patching and doing your part on the patching pieces is keeping your eyes on your security tools, right? You've invested into your security tools, and you really need to keep your eyes out because you can, like Jay said, you might patch the operating system, right? But there could be an application on that operating system that is still an attack surface where someone could potentially exploit and lead on to a further impact that nobody wants to deal with on the ransomware side of things, right? So and people who have had ransomware, I guarantee you, they don't want to deal with it ever again. It's never fun.
No one does, right? Jay, what's your take about the entire industry in terms of, you've talked about in your sharing, you talk about the vendors' responsiveness or otherwise, but and everybody's almost using Log4j, so I think it's heavily used.
I would say that the popular software vendors out there that are utilizing this component have responded fairly fast. That's a general observation that I've seen. So in the course of the day-to-day activities that we have protecting customers, we often get, especially during this, the last December, we had a lot of inquiries like, hey, I found this Log4j vulnerable component. What do you guys think? Am I being attacked or what? And when we look into it, no, it's just sitting there, really. And then, of course, we have to kind of go an extra mile to determine if what other things we can actually mention. So sometimes we actually, well, most of the time, we take some time off and just try to see if, like, okay, this software component, maybe we haven't heard about, try to Google search on it. Oh, you know what? They actually have a patch out or they have an advisory out. And it varies between one to three things, actually. First, the vendor would have said, yeah, we've assessed it. There's no way that the threat actor would have utilized it. It's just sitting there. If you want to delete it, go ahead and delete it. That's fine. Second one is similar to what the stance of VMware. here are some scripts, here are some mitigating controls, sorry, compensating controls that you could do. And you could kind of seal yourself off. Here are some best practices on how to actually secure your environment. The third one is, yep, it could be used. Here's a patch. And we've seen this, 2 to 3 days in, a weekend. And we've also done, we've also seen, however, software components where there's nothing that we could find out there. And it's just something to consider, really. The next time we're going to install a software, is this vendor going to continuously provide patches for the software? It's just a one-time thing going to pay for a few $100 and I'm not going to get support on. Something to consider, really, because Log4j is a shared component. And I think it has to be really not meaning to shift the blame on the software vendor, but if you have to really consider some software here, this Log4j occurrence is actually a very good example of maintaining that you actually pick the correct software, so that this is everything being discussed here is actually the supply chain, and making sure that they actually protect the supply chain, right?
Yeah, and I feel you in that one. I'll go to Suraj in a while, but I think we feel strongly for those niche software vendor, or maybe the small size one, because they may not have a lot of bandwidth also,
right,
and thing. So I'll pick it up later. We have questions coming in. I'd like to understand, what do they do? Because all of us have those niche software talking to some of our applications. So I'll go to Suraj. One of the questions is, in your earlier conversation, in slides, you talked about, thank you for bringing out the facts on the 4 vulnerabilities, right? The 4 CVEs. 2 of the 4 that you've mentioned are critical, while the rest are moderate. I hope you don't mind if we step back a little bit. We have novices also in security coming in and joining us. Can you briefly just walk us back through, just very simply, what is the logic of this vulnerability scoring portion, right? Because as you said, critical, you say moderate, on a more general level, at least for the novices that are joining us at the moment.
No problem. Thanks, Mala. I think it's a good thing to clarify. So there's a CVS Score, right? Right now being used, they call it a 3.0 version. It's like so there's a multiple parameters being used to calculate the criticality or the severity of any vulnerability. The most important part here is that, is it a remote vector, right? When I'm saying remote vector, it means that can somebody exploit that particular vulnerability being not on that particular system from somewhere else, right? Over the wire. That's a one. If that is achievable, that just means like, yeah, the severity already goes up on that bar. But second part here is the complexity. Sometimes that, yeah, vulnerability is there, we know that, but creating the exploit code or to hit that vulnerable part of that code is not that easy. It's not that easy to everyone to go and hit that vulnerable part of the code. It requires a lot of research. So that's become a complexity. How complex that is to hit that vulnerable part of the code and able to execute the attacker code in that application or in that system. So the complexity matters a lot here. So it's sometimes very plain texting, and you can throw in your code anywhere in the request and it get executed. And that's actually happening in the first CVE, that you just specify that your code or your attack pattern, and it will get executed very easily on that victim machine. So that's why the attack complexity for the first one is low. It's not high. If you see that, the attack complexity is not high there. But for the others, high, because of various reasons. There is, it's not as the applications come, right? You install that applications in your, and you're not changing much. It's a default configuration we say. If something is in the default configuration in the industry, mostly, most of the applications are being deployed in a default configuration. And that's where the first one is, the default configuration. But others are not with the default configuration. If someone, some developer change it a little bit, so then they are not vulnerable for that. So that's a point in the first one. But for others, that is like not on non-default. So the attack surface get lower when it's on non-default configuration options. Correct. So that's the way from where we define the complexity, the severity of any vulnerability based on various factors. attack from where it can be local or remote? Do you need a privilege? Right? Do you need any initial access to do the carry out attack, or simply you are accessing on Google website, any other website, and you just send attack pattern on that particular website on particular request, and you got in? So those matters when defining what you call it, scoring of the vulnerability there.
Yeah. Thank you, Suraj.
I also just want to touch on that when we're talking about product vendors which openly came and they said yes, they are vulnerable and they were releasing patch and all those things. That's great. But with Log4j, because this is a commonly used utility being by a developer, right? And it's very buried in somewhere in the very dead end of the code, and might not everyone aware. Like even I develop something, I'm not aware of that where it is being used and it's being deployed, right? It's running. It's not easy to find that if I'm vulnerable for that or not. So if you just go and scan through your vulnerability scanner, might not be able to catch it because you have using it on your own way, right? So that's a problem with this particular vulnerability. That's a very unique problem with this particular vulnerability with Log4j. We are seeing why a customer is facing a challenge to patch it because they don't know that they are vulnerable or not first place, because they don't have the information about that, because they're not maintaining what kind of a library utility being used in their development cycle. So now it's to see when you're in a development cycle, we have a new way of finding like what kind of a library or open source object are being used in my product or my application has to be tracked very well and maintained. So if something happens in the future, we should know what is my software composition looks like if I'm vulnerable for anything or not.
Correct. Exactly what Jay was saying earlier in his last portion, which is really important to maintain a very good inventory of either active, on standby, or probably very old versions. One of the questions that was raised in one of our in our Q&A, which is I probably will ask either Chris or Jay to comment, is that we're correct. A lot of the vendors have talked about that they have updated their softwares and stuff like that. So one of the question is, by just having the affected Log4j component version on our system, even though the vendor says that they're not being used, can they theoretically be still exploited? Meaning to say they're not using this component at all. Jay or Chris, care to comment?
In theory, of course, everything is possible, right? It's theoretical.
I don't like your smiles, by the way, guys.
Suraj actually touched on this actually when he was going through the different versions of Log4j. The complexity of actually launching an attack for this vulnerable version may entirely depend on how the DLL or actually this component has been used by the application. So if it's not being loaded, it's just packaged. You could package a software and then just put in some files there. That's not actually going to be used. Not in the actual loading of the product or running of the product. It's not going to affect the performance of the product whatsoever. Then if it's not being loaded, it's not going to be used, and it's going to be really, really hard for an attacker, targeted or not, to really exploit this component. It could be sitting there, but they have to think of a way to kind of interact with that component first, utilize it in such a way that it's going to be dropped. Now, it also extends towards how it actually is being utilized or how it may be utilized. So on the servers where most of these binaries have been found, the Log4j, because it's often found in servers, a lot of these applications actually run this software would be running under, say, a service account or a local system like anti-authority system. And when you compromise the software component that actually loads Log4j, then you actually drop into the same privilege as the account. And so if you're running as a domain account, hopefully not, a service account or a anti-authority system, then you drop into the same privilege, right? So if you think about it, if there's some software component that actually is able to kind of assist into the exploitation of this component, then in theory it's possible. If it's just sitting there, maybe possible, but it has to be like something specially crafted, nothing off the shelf. You have to be very specifically targeted for a threat actor to be kind of inspired and really motivated into exploiting that single vulnerable binary in your environment.
Okay, cool. So it's hard, but it's not impossible.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris,
There might be
any
easier ways.
take on it?
Yeah, there might be easier ways.
There's probably going to be easier ways to go from one machine to the other versus trying to create something new. Like Jay says, someone really has to be trying, like, to initiate that service remotely. So yeah, just the binary itself, I mean, it's a low, but it's still possible, right?
Correct. So is it soft to say that one of the advices that we wanted to probably make in this conversation is they really need to scan everything that sits in whatever applications they have, whether they are outdated one, I'm not sure, whether they're obviously barely used. Is this a good sort of action to take to not disregard any applications that sits there? Pretty much scan the entire system?
Understanding your inventory is probably, I would say, is your first step to addressing this, right? If you know where your software vulnerabilities are, even if you're not using the binaries, you can go validate whether or not that binary is being used, right? Or the service is being used, or if another machine is using it as well, right? That's the important piece, is getting your inventory correct at first. And I know we probably got a whole bunch of IT folks over here going, inventory, what is that? We just run things. But it is one of the most crucial parts. There's many incidents where we, not necessarily just for Log4j, but other incidents where we'll find a breach point and they're like, oh no, that doesn't exist anymore. And like, oh no, it exists. We found it. And they had no idea that machine was still running and it was still accessible from the web, for example. So inventory is very, very important in this.
Correct. Let's not leave the conversation on, go ahead, Suraj, please.
No, sorry. I just want to add on this, like, if you are running, if you don't know what to go first, what to prioritize first. So the best thing is to do here is like find out what are the open to public first, because the remote code is more serious than the local one, because for that you need some other vulnerabilities, as Chris explained, right? There's some proxy seller being used or something like that, other vulnerabilities being used to pivot. But the most critical is like, if you're any application which is exposed to the public and can be accessed to the public network, see if they are vulnerable or not, and patch those first, or simply go and patch or remove that binary from your servers. The first step they have to do.
Yeah, and that's a very, very logical way to do it, right? Anything that is exposed. Let's not leave the issue or the concerns on both the severity and also the whether I'm high risk or low risk. One of the questions that we have here from our audience also is that, assuming what is the risk level for small businesses, and small meaning a couple of computers, a couple of routers, a couple of desktop in there, are they equally vulnerable just like anyone else into this issue?
Yeah. It's the same risk score if you're running vulnerable application, and if that system is get compromised, and if that system is connected to some other data source or backend, you are equally vulnerable as the big enterprise, because your data is important, right? If it's being used to pivot any ransomware attack or anything else, you are done then. So yes, it's equally critical to patch for lower scale business as well.
Yeah, I was going to go back to the email that I shared earlier, right? That snippet of the email. Think about it. If you read the email, if you got a chance to fully read it while it was on the screen, the attacker is telling them that, hey, I was in contact with Conti and Lockbit, right? Those are big ransomware gang names, right? They're trying to become an affiliate of that ransomware gang. They're trying to communicate with them because they breached them. They had the breach ready, and they were ready to they were trying to find who's going to be the buyer to essentially come in and do the ransomware as a service situation, right? They failed because we were able to cut them off and we shut the door on them, right? They still got the data exfilled, but Locky and Conti are likely not going to be interested, for example, of leaking this data because there's no ransom associated with it. Because Lockheed and Conti, for example, they want to use the exfil data as the secret leverage for you to pay the ransom. They don't care about leaked data. I mean, people leak data all the time. But this affiliate may take a target towards a smaller medium business company, right? Because this was a larger enterprise itself that this was found. So this affiliate can practice and refine his craft somewhere else on a smaller medium business where Conti Lockbit won't necessarily be interested because there's not going to be the big ransom payout, right? They're too small. But you know what? I can come in here and I can do a simple ransomware event on your environment. That's something I crafted up myself, right? And essentially I could say, hey, pay me $10,000 in Bitcoin and we'll call it good, right? But like the smaller medium business, Lockheed, Conti, those big ransomware gangs, they're probably not interested because they don't get the 100,000, they don't get to 200,000.
That's right.
Bitcoin. They get the smaller medium business are still at risk though. It only takes one endpoint. As soon as they get that foothold, and they move quick. Jay's team knows they move really fast.
Minutes.
Yeah.
And I think this threat actors, Chris, that you're talking about are the minimizer, right? They just want minimal action, minimal gain. So they're probably sorry for the person who asked this question. So they're still somehow customized target for small businesses that sadly is coming.
Yeah, go for it, Jay.
Yeah, I'd like to say that the smaller end, those smaller businesses actually. So we did some sort of a very short study during this time, and we found out that the software that's being used in this kind of environment where it's actually a little bit smaller is a little bit more predictable. See, and when I say predictable, they're using software that is common and very well known. Whereas those industries actually stretch towards a larger enterprise, they're a little bit, that's where we actually see that some of the software is not really known because they have specific needs. So for example, we found some environments where they actually have their own in-house developers. And unfortunately, these in-house developers actually bundle and actually use Log4j just for their own logging purpose. And this kind of staff, they may exist in the small to medium businesses, programmers and such, but it's something that we relatively see in like software warehouses, right? Larger enterprises where you have specific needs and such. And so it's a little bit more predictable towards that end of the customer base. It's really where you go to the larger enterprise where you see varied amounts of applications where it's kind of a little bit unpredictable. So it's there, but if you take the stance of patching first and really just sealing out the vulnerabilities, and as Suraj said, actually just making sure that you don't have open holes in your network, you can relatively defend effectively, I would say.
So that's a little bit of good news.
Yeah.
This is actually another good question that is somehow back to back with this question, with the earlier question. So theoretically, as we're now talking about, because as far as I know, there are no significant exploitation on Log4j yet, right? And I'm knocking on wood at the moment. So as we're talking about theoretical exploitation, so assuming if the vendor software was not being used, could it be referenced by another application if it's in its path?
Definitely possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely possible. So if I would to say, I don't know, have a specifically craft a software package that would actually reference this file, this DLL file in this path, then there's actually a chance that you're going to expose this DLL. But again, that's going to be a very, very, I would say, arduous and very extensive experiment or exercise to really take advantage of that binary that's just sitting there. Again, it's possible. It's not impossible, but there are other ways. So, for example, if you're already in this environment and you're already introducing software components, chances are you already have admin credentials. Why go through that length? And there are other methods of exploiting and pawning an environment, so to speak, right? So
yeah, the piece about the VMware part, and I'm sorry we're beating up on VMware today. That's unique is the fact that we get to, when the attacker uses Log4j to get into vCenter, it gives them the access to control the entire ESXi instances, right? So they're able to push the ports that are required to be open. They can create new network devices if they wanted to, really dive themselves into it, versus, because sometimes some admins won't tie vCenter to the domain, right? Like they'll have their own local logins, which is separate, which is nice to have, but sometimes they'll have SSH, for example, disabled on the ESXi instances. Well, if I get into vCenter, it's just a click of a button. I can enable SSH across the entire environment, and now I can transfer files in and out. I can do whatever I want because nobody's looking at SSH traffic, right?
Yeah, correct.
So,
especially for this type of attacks, right? So let's now proceed. We're a couple of minutes. We have a couple more minutes, but I'd like to go through the other interesting portion because, and you guys can correct me, we haven't seen any significant intrusion from a Log4j perspective. So at the moment, maybe this question also goes to either Jay or Suraj. How will customers know that they are being attacked? I mean, what are the indicators that they should be glaring at the moment?
Good question. I think so. The first thing is, I know if I don't know if they are using any security product or not. So let's not talk about the security. You can monitor any security product deployed there. So let's not talk about that. But how natively we can monitor that if I'm attacked or not. So the first thing, they can always go and check their application server logs, because in application server logs you can find those strings, attack string like JNDI, LDAP, lookup strings in their application logs. So go and check if you're using any SIM product and all. Go and check and those strings. If you find, it means you've been compromised for sure. And also check if in your systems there's some unknown process running, or some connections out from your network to some unknown ports. So the most important part is like LDAP connections going out from your network to the public, right? That's not very common. If it's happening, it means yes, you are being compromised. So there are like few indicators which can be used to know that if you are being attacked or not, without any security vendor product also. Security vendor product helps you centralize all those information and be in one place you can monitor, right? But there are some and protect you. But it just, we're talking about, you can check if you are compromised or not.
Any other tips, Jay or Chris? I think this is one of the big questions.
The incidents that we've seen point to the fact that there's two relatively very obvious things that actually happen once the exploit has been successful. Once they're dropped into this environment, either they download some new stuff to introduce into the environment, or they try, they go through this phase of figuring out where they actually dropped into. And so this is where you see a lot of PowerShell, a lot of command line utilities being launched, trying to figure out, this environment is actually worth proceeding with the exploit. Is it worth proceeding with the data exfiltration? You see a lot of that, right? Because it could be that they were just opportunistic and they got lucky. They fell into this environment by scanning an open explore port, and then if they are, they found that this target is this environment is actually worthwhile of their time, then they would start to introduce their tool sets. So very consistently, right? Very consistently. And in fact, the example I had in when I started my session, they were actually introducing a shell loader, right? So that they could introduce further components within the environment, and they started to deploy rclone so that they can do data exfil. But it's very predictable, because if, for example, this host, there's no expected network traffic outbound to it, it's very obvious. It stands out like a sore thumb, right? And if you don't expect that account or this host is trying to reach out and try to authenticate to multiple hosts, again, from a network perspective, it actually stands out. So the successful exploitation, and regardless if it's Log4j or Log4Shell, would actually trigger a sequence of events that would really stand out if you're actually watching your logs. Hopefully you are, because suddenly there's like an anomalous behavior within that host that's actually not expected. And unfortunately, you know, what does it look like? It's a little bit gray area there, because as of this point in time, you know, I think for the most part, they drop in and they try to figure out what they can do within the environment, taking advantage of what the environment, what environment has to offer the threat actor.
Correct. And I think it's all about aberration at the end of the day. I mean, easy to say, but I'm sure there's a lot. I'm not sure if it was in Chris's or Jay's presentation. One of the questions that we receive here is that they're just very interested, as we have telemetry on Russia, Ukraine and stuff. But one of the questions is, do we have servers in Ukraine that allows you to see some of this telemetry of what's going on in that region? Maybe we can step back and explain our telemetry on this.
I'll let Jay answer that one.
Let me see how that's actually
The joys of being the MXDR guy.
So I would say that we do have I'd like to separate these two things, right? So honeypots, yes, of course. Any mature software vendor would actually have honeypots, and Trend Micro is not excluded from those vendors. So we do have honeypots, yes. Telemetry from specific country, yeah, we have a lot. We have a lot, and I don't think it's actually quite unique. So I would say yes and yes to both. Miley, we see both ends of the stick, and yeah.
Great. Okay, it's a very touchy subject, but trust us, that data is 100% accurate. Thank you so much for joining us. 1 hour goes so fast. I just want probably just one word, because the entire webinar is all about what we have learned and what do we know about Log4j. So in one word, can you leave our fantastic audience in here? What have you learned personally to respond to this year-ender security issue? And sadly, it's also a beginner of the year. We'll probably start with Suraj in that order, Chris and Jay at the end.
Yeah, so in one word, I would say, know your environment and ensure that you're patching as soon as possible if there is any vulnerability being disclosed in the future.
Yeah, good one. Chris?
If you don't know who did the activity, go validate it and find out. If it looks suspicious, you need to go look at it.
No, don't trust anyone. Exactly. Jay, you have the last one.
Vigilance.
Oh yeah. What a good way to end. One word strong enough to say thank you, Chris, Jay, Suraj, and I'll turn it over to Eric. We really love these conversations, but hopefully I'm crossing my finger that this is the last of the Log4j, and we wish all who are doing it to do it correctly and stay vigilant, as Jay said. Eric?
Just to wrap things up, I put them up here on the screen, but we do have several online resources. If you want to look for additional information, have those up on the screen with the QR codes. These were up earlier as well. The recording will be available on the session. Oops, if I can forward it, there we go. That'll be on our main breach detection resource hub. So you can see the link and everything on there. And we do have everyone's email from the panel on here as well. So if there's anything that we weren't able to get to, or you have additional questions, please feel free to email us. Also, any future webinars will also be posted on the resource hub. So, you can look for upcoming ones. We try to have these as often as is needed to keep everybody up to date. So thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.